So, this is an incredible chapter in the Bible because I love the way that chapter 2 starts off by talking about how, the first mention of Sabbath and talking about rest, because it's extremely important that we balance hard work with rest. And I used to always think about rest as, oh, well, if you're taking rest, you're taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your mental health, your emotional health. But I love how here and even underneath, it talks about the importance of taking rest, but from a spiritual health standpoint. And I had never thought about that before, but how, because I remember at church, maybe a few months ago, the pastor was talking about how every day we are at war. And we made, excuse me, and we may try to think that, oh, well, everything is good, everything is peaches, everything is roses. But every day we're going to war with, our flesh. Every day we're fighting, the devil and all of these temptations. And so by properly resting, it's like we're giving ourselves energy to take on these battles day by day. Because just like how we wouldn't trust ourselves to consistently get, an hour of sleep and then perform at our best, we can't expect to get an hour of sleep and to feel rejuvenated and to feel spiritually refreshed and energized enough to take on these distractions and these demons and all of those things. And so I loved that because it's like, well, if God can rest on the seventh day, we can all rest and we can, not feel guilty for taking care of ourselves, but also understanding that when it's time to work, it's time to work. And so being able to distinguish between hard work and rest is extremely important. And so it also talks about here at the bottom that this is where the name Yahweh is introduced, which essentially refers to, excuse me, which essentially refers to the personal name of God. It's like the relational aspect of God. And it talks about how this Yahweh describes the God who, relates to the Israelites and makes them his people. It's the part where, God, it's the name for the God who wants to have a relationship with us, the part of God that wants to have a relationship with us. And before I read this chapter, once I started listening to more Christian music, Christian rap, Christian R&B, I would hear the name Yahweh and I didn't really know what that meant. And so it was through like reading Genesis that I was like, oh, that's why they're referring to, God as Yahweh, because I didn't really know. I was like, well, is that another name for God? Is that, do you refer to God as Yahweh when you're worshiping him, maybe when you're praying? So it was really cool to kind of see that explanation at the bottom. And so that's why I think this Bible is a must for everybody. I think my wife has a version of the Bible called Every Woman's Bible or something. I'll see if I can find it. I'll try to link that in the description as well. But her Bible is amazing too because she loves how it gives her space to be able to journal and to talk about and to write down her thoughts as she's reading the Bible. And so then for Genesis chapter 2, verses 8 through 14, it talks about how God provided the perfect environment for Adam and Eve. And it talks about how we oftentimes can blame our own circumstances for our difficulties. We might say, oh, well, I want to start a YouTube channel, but I haven't started it yet because I don't have a DSLR camera or I don't have this super expensive camera. And the thing is, it's crazy because even after we get the camera, it's still up to us to actually take action. Like I remember over a year ago when I got the iPhone 15 Pro, in my head I was like, okay, this is the phone that I need to start recording and to be consistent with my YouTube channel day in and day out. And because I was coming from the 12 Pro to the 15 Pro, I'm thinking, oh, well, the camera is going to be so much better. So now I'm actually going to feel motivated to record. But what I didn't know was it's not about what you have or what you buy. It's still up to you to take advantage and to be resourceful of the things that you do have. Because so many times, and I think people do that all the time, even with working out, where people might buy all this clothes for the gym. They might get the membership and, get protein and get these things and think that, oh, okay, well, now that I have all of these things in place, now I'm going to start going to the gym because I spent all this money on running shoes and, shorts and the Lululemon, the Gymshark, whatever. But what people don't understand is even having those things, it's still up to the person to actually take action. And so even if they create the perfect environment, they buy a treadmill, they keep it in their apartment or in their home, or they build a home gym, it's still up to them to actually be disciplined enough to use it, because having all of these things, it doesn't do anybody any good if it's just sitting there collecting dust. Then it becomes one of those situations where, yes, you did have the perfect environment for taking action, but you never actually took any action. And so, yeah, that was what I immediately thought about, was how, you know, we might blame our environment a lot for the things that happen or don't happen to us, but that's usually never the case. And a few more examples. I feel like I'm rambling, but I remember the first time I got my driver's license and I got a car. And before, I used to have issues with running late, and I would always tell myself, oh, it's because I don't have a car. And once I get a car, I'm going to be really good with my time. I'm going to be really good with planning things out and leaving on time. But once I got a car, that actually didn't change. And so I had to realize that it wasn't the lack of a car that was making me late. It was my lack of preparation. It was my lack of time management. It was my lack of urgency when it came to getting ready for things. And so, yeah, you guys, so I thought that was super cool. And then in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 through 17, it talks about how God forbade Adam and Eve from eating from that tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so I thought it was really interesting here because you know how sometimes you have a question, but it doesn't really come to you until you read an explanation of something. And then you're like, wait a second, I actually was wondering that as well, but I never thought about actually, looking into it, or I never really thought about trying to gain a deeper understanding from that. And so here it talks about the reason why God, created the tree of knowledge of good and evil was because ultimately God wants us to choose him. God easily could have made, every single tree in the Garden of Eden, a good tree that, was fine to eat from. But then there's no choosing in that situation. And God wanted us all to choose him, to be in a position where we're choosing him over other things. Because the way that I heard it at church also a few months back was, I remember the pastor said, the reason why that's so special is when you get married, it's so special because you chose that person and that person chose you. It's not, a marriage doesn't feel the same if, just kind of at birth, two people get assigned to just kind of grow up together and marry one another. It doesn't really, it doesn't resonate the same as it does when you choose to spend the rest of your life with someone and they make the same decision. And God doesn't want us to feel like we are forced to choose him and to love him and to worship him, because then it's not really love, it's more of just an obligation. And I think even like with school, I think that's something where it's like with school, I think a lot of people don't necessarily love school, especially early on, because you don't really have a choice. I mean, you kind of just wake up in the morning and you go to school day in and day out, whether you want to go to school or not. And so I think that's why for a lot of people, it's not really until you get to college and maybe med school or dental school or any kind of training after that that even if you may not love school at that point still, you look at school more differently. You take more accountability, more ownership when it comes to school because you understand that college isn't necessarily mandatory, even though, of course, like, with me being Nigerian, and I'm sure for a lot of other cultures, it is, they kind of look at it as more mandatory. But in the grand scheme of things, what you decide to do isn't necessarily mandatory. And so you understand that once you get to college, once you get to professional school or whatever, you're making that decision. And so that's why school starts to hit so much different once you get to college because you're making the decision to actively be there every day. You're making the decision to go to study hall or to do homework or to study for exams when you don't necessarily have to. Um, and so when you don't have to do something, but you decide to do it anyway, there's a different, you get a different feeling of pride. And I feel like that too, even just reading the Bible, spending time with God. I've noticed that when I read the Bible, I feel this overwhelming sense of peace and calm. Because when I don't read the Bible, when I'm not recording like I am now, there's a part of me that just feels like I'm not living in my purpose. Like I'm not doing the things that I know I should be doing. And so, yeah, you guys, and then there's this other part in the Bible where it even talks about how it's important how in the Bible they talk about in Genesis chapter 2 verse 25 how Adam and Eve were both naked and unafraid. And it talks about that sense of innocence that they had, and that it's very interesting because when they were naked and unashamed and they eat from that tree, all of a sudden they become embarrassed of, their nakedness, and they start looking for clothes. And it's almost like from that point in the Bible, that was the start of when things became over sexualized and when people started to think in a certain manner. And so it was really interesting how in this Bible they brought that point up to talk about how the symbolism of being naked and unafraid is having that innocence to you, and how once, Adam and Eve ate from the apple, it caused everybody to kind of lose that sense of innocence in a way. And so, yeah, you guys, that's pretty much all of my notes. Um, yeah, I want to make sure that because I had taken some notes as I was reading Genesis chapter 2, and I wanted to make sure that I hit on everything for this video because that'll happen to me sometimes where I'll finish recording and then maybe 5 or 10 minutes later I have this idea and I'm like, oh, I forgot to add that point to the video. But yeah, you guys, if you guys stayed the whole time, I really appreciate you guys. I hope that you guys have a blessed day. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, let me know in the comments below. If you guys enjoy these Bible studies, please subscribe as well. I'm going to be uploading a ton of Bible studies. And so, just to help myself grow closer to God, but also to help all of you form a relationship with God and to grow closer with God. Because I think there's nothing more beautiful than people getting closer with God together and people talking about the word together. And so, yeah, you guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Stay blessed, have a blessed day, and I'll see all of you guys in the next one.